We are in week 2 of a series that we've been calling Slow Fade. And last week we talked about this phenomenon, right? How for people, we get to this place sometimes in life where we feel like we've fallen out of love and we can't get up, right? Like, I really love that person. That person was just so important to me. And then for whatever reason, however much water passes under the bridge, however much time, and stuff has happened, we just feel like we're stuck, right? And we don't know how to re-engage with that. But we talked that God has called us to a different kind of love, one that lasts and perseveres no matter what. But we still have to account for and deal with the entropy that we all feel. And so I've been showing you guys this, show you again. Entropy, it's the second law of thermodynamics, and it states that entropy always increases with time. Well, what is that? Entropy is the gradual decline into disorder. It's the idea that over time, all things peter out, right? Like, we start strong, and maybe we get a little stronger, but like over time, given enough time, things peter out. It's not very common for us to be more excited about something 10 years in, 20 years in, 30 years in. Now, let me give you an example. I have played golf for about 30 years now. And if there are other golfers in the room and you feel my pain, like, I really enjoy golf. I even in moments love golf. But over the 30 years, there have been moments where I have hated it so much, I thought, I'm never going to play this again. Has anybody else ever? Yeah, right? Like, there are just those days or those moments you're like, I can't even swing the club anymore. Like, I don't know what happened. Things can increase in depth and meaning, but excitement usually diminishes. It usually fades. And this is why everything has a life cycle, right? Have you noticed that? Like, everything starts and at some point comes to an end. Why? Because people weren't made to maintain the same level of energy and push forever. Anybody else ever said this? I've said this a lot. The older I get, the more I say it. It's like, I just don't have enough energy for that anymore. Right? And you don't have to be that old to start saying that, right? And I think at some point it is like a slippery slope, but it does get a little bit worse. I remember talking to a pastor. I met him. We were having lunch. He pastored a large church down in the Columbus area, and he wasn't super old. But he got to the point, he said, at his church, they would just do capital campaign after capital campaign after capital campaign because there was another thing that needed to happen, or hey, we've been growing, and so we need to add this, or this needs to be replaced. And literally, like, at his church, he's like, I was there for 30 years, and it was just like, we just did one after another. And he goes, it was the last one that I was leading, and I was in the middle of it, and he just had this overwhelming sensation. He's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't have the energy to continue to cast vision and get people excited and motivate them and inspire them. He's like, and in that moment, he's like, I knew it was time to retire. And so it was just kind of an interesting conversation, right? He kind of experienced that where his level of energy and his ability to push had diminished. We are calling this phenomenon this month slow fade. I told you last week it's like the frog in the water, right? What happens when you drop a frog in a pot of boiling water? It jumps out. But if you put it in a nice pot of just, perfectly warm water, he's like, oh, this is great, right? You might even have some sunglasses on or something. But over a little bit of time, you heat that up slowly. In a few minutes, you're going to have a dead boiled frog, right? Because they get lulled to sleep. It's the slow fade. I also told you guys this. Shelly and Greg were at the marriage thing. I left Shelly out of this. I don't want to talk about that. I told Shelly that this week. But man, Pastor Bud, Pastor Jeremy, and myself, it's like, we see each other all the time. I'm like, hey, we it doesn't seem like we age. until I look at a picture of us from 10 years ago, and I'm like, like, those guys look so much younger, and their hair is so much darker, right? Come on. You ever do that? You think, no, I look pretty good. Then you see a picture of yourself from however many years ago. It happens, right? It's this almost imperceptible diminishing that we just need to recognize and we need to address. This is true in our friendships. It's true in our relationships. It's certainly true in our marriages, with our hobbies, in churches. It's really true in every single thing. And today, I want us to think about one of the most common areas we experience a slow fade. It's with our jobs. Isn't that so good? You're like, no, that's my life, right? Like, that's just sort of how it works. Because here's the truth, right? So much of the time, no matter what you do, work just feels like work, right? It's like, this is work. Yeah, that's why they call it that. And listen, it's so easy for all of us to fall into this trap of believing we just have a bad job, right? Listen, there are bad jobs, there are bad places to work, but having observed this probably hundreds of times, people who give into this idea that I just got a bad job, I just got to find another one, I got another bad job, I just got to find another one, right? Will quite quickly feel the exact same with every single job, right? Oh, I got another bad one. No, it's just work. Right? Sometimes it feels like work. That's the point of work. And our world, I think, has shifted so much in this respect. And so as we think about this today, right, the idea that life and work can quite often feel like we are all kind of stuck on repeat. Have you ever felt like that with work? Right? Like a skipping record, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, oh, thank God it's Friday. And then, oh, Monday again, right? And over and over and over. And it wasn't that long ago where people started in a job or a field and retired in that job or from that field, right? This was true for both of my parents. My entire lives, my parents, both of them did the same thing. Currently, people in our world have just over 12 jobs through their adult years. Men average 12.5 jobs and women 12.1 jobs. And people change jobs on average every 4.3 years. And if you're like, man, I've been at my job way longer than that, well, then you skew the average. It means somebody you know switches every 6 months, right? Like that's sometimes how that works. I even have pastor friends who I've watched this. Every 2 or 3 years, you know, there'll be another opportunity, maybe a little bit more money, maybe a little bigger church, maybe just a different challenge, and they're like, oh, we've heard from God, and we got to go. You know, and really, as I've observed this, it happens consistently enough where I think to myself, you know, I don't think it's like either you're tired of dealing with people or problems or issues or whatever's, right? And so you're just like, oh, I've heard from God, I got to go do it again. And to me, that seems like a lot, right? It seems like a lot of upheaval to uproot your family every small window of time just to do something else or go somewhere else. How I have scratched this slow fade itch in my life is hobbies, right? If I ever think to myself, I got to just totally change everything in my life, I probably need to find a hobby, right? Like it's just, that's what I do. And so the toil and monotony of work, we see this in the Bible, right, is a result, is part of the fall, of sin entering the world. But just like with all things, God's intent is to redeem that. And I believe this. I really believe God not only has a plan for each and every one of us, but he also has a plan for the places that we go to every day and call work. So let me give you a few reminders. Can I do that? All right. So the first one comes from 2 Corinthians 5:20. I shared this a couple weeks ago, but we got to go back. The text tells us this. So we are Christ's ambassadors. Who are Christ's ambassadors? Yeah, nice. We are, right? And God is making his appeal through us. What does he want people to know? Don't do this, do that, say the right thing, live the right... No. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. Come back to God. It's okay. It doesn't matter the mistakes you've made, the things you've done, the sins you've committed. We get to be God's representatives to go to people to tell them, hey, come back. You are welcome. You represent God where you live, where you work, where you learn, and where you play. Right? Really, everywhere you go, you represent God. I sold cars for 6 months before coming here, just kind of as an in-between in that transition. It's a much longer story than that. That's just like the one-sentence version. Many of you have heard it before. But I always tell people this. In my 6 months selling cars, I did way more personal ministry than I've ever done as a pastor. What? How's that possible, Rob? Because I was around a whole bunch of people every second of every day who were far from God. And they had somebody who over time they learned was a safe person to ask their questions to share their concerns with. And it was powerful. So why is this important? Here's the key. In the last 25 years, more people have left the church than came to the church, came to God during the first Great Awakening, the second Great Awakening, and all of Billy Graham's ministry put together. The last 25 years. So 150 years, including the two Great Awakenings and all of Billy Graham's ministry. And in 25 years, more than that was undone. Actually, more than 40 million people have left the church in the last 25 years. The last number of weeks, I've been walking. So I go somewhere, usually go over to the track at some point when I got a window during the day and walk 2 to 3 miles, just kind of become part of my routine. Although going in circles, sometimes it's okay if I'm distracted, but other days where I'm literally thinking, there's number 4, here's number 5. It's like, right? Like it's like the video we just saw. And so Shelley actually said, you need to download an audiobook. Well, there's a book I got that I've been really excited about reading, and I'm like, maybe there's an audio version of it that I can listen to as well as I'm walking. And so I downloaded, and I'm like, oh, there it is. And I clicked it, $16, I purchased it, and then I realized, oh, no, I searched for the book that I wanted. There's not an audiobook version, but this other book had the same colored front page, and I just pushed the button, and I just bought a different book. And so I'm like, I guess I listen to this. And there were a couple things that they said that were brand new thoughts for me that I'd never really heard before or thought of before. The one is this. One of the main reasons so many people have left the church is because the committed, mature leaders wanted to take strong stances on one side of cultural issues, on one side of racial issues, on one side of sexuality issues, on one side of political issues, with no room for conversation. And so many people, we can't even talk about this, interact with this, be gracious toward people. nope, here's our stance, people were like, then I'm out, right? And then the other one, which was kind of interesting to me, forever they've said 80% of church growth isn't really new people coming to Jesus. It's the fact that, well, look, there's an interesting church over there that I'd like to try. It's really just Christians shifting from one church to another. And so one of the points the book made was that our unbelieving world is troubled that we as God's people aren't able to figure things out, right? And so when they see the church, they see people who are like, well, if we disagree on something, we'll just go somewhere where people agree with me. Or if I don't have the influence I think that I have or should have or deserve, I'll just go somewhere. Like, this is kind of what most people do. And it's kind of like saying, I'm really committed to marriage, so when I leave her, I'll find another one because I'm really committed to marriage. Like, would you ever believe that person is really, really committed to marriage? No. And it's like, I love Jesus, I'm committed to church. Well, yeah, whichever one suits your fancy or agrees with you or gives you the most attaboys, right? And again, like, I get it, we're all people, right? The problem is when we live this way, the unbelieving world looks and says, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. They say this Jesus guy transformed their life, but all I see is opinionated people who want to get their way. And so what's the idea here? The idea is this, the idea that we are ambassadors. It's our responsibility to go to them, to go to the world, to go to the people who are far from Jesus. Why? Because we are Christ's ambassadors. We are the hands and feet of Jesus. And we, all of us, right? Well, not me, but you. We live, we work, we learn, we play, where all these people are, right? You are around them. And here's the truth. When they were coming to us, that was nice. And as the church, we got lazy. But it's always been our responsibility to go to them and to make a way for them, not only get to us, but more importantly, for them to get to Jesus. And here's what I hate. I hate when we as God's people become this gauntlet with all of our thoughts and opinions and rules where we literally beat the heck out of people and they don't have enough energy to actually get to Jesus because we have gotten in the way. And so I think almost everything I do is about this, inconveniencing us and putting the responsibility on us so that we can make it as easy as possible for those far from Jesus to get to him at all costs. All right, reminder number 2, John 15:12. Jesus says this, my command is this, so we're getting a command here, right? Love each other as I have loved you. Now I want to ask again, did you guys all love having Sound Foundation here today? So 30 years ago, Bethany and I attended the same school, 3 decades. We were college students at the exact same place. It was awesome. We loved our time there. It was encouraging. Like, sometimes you think, just when you go to college, nobody's going to care. And that's true in some respects, right? Like, none of your professors call your dorm room and say, hey, you missed class 3 times, you better get, that probably still doesn't happen. But people literally care about you. It's very encouraging. It was nurturing. It was educational. We learned a ton. So being there at the school made me excited to spend my life serving Jesus in the local church, right? I literally remember my time at Indiana West, and I thought, man, like, God has called me to the best thing ever. This is the best job ever. Until I got out of college. And as soon as I actually, not as like someone like Christopher who grew up in the church, but as an adult who is now working in the church, a professional, a vocational minister in the church, I started to learn things. I started to learn how terrible people are. It didn't take me very long. I still remember this one lady. I felt like God was like, I didn't get to preach much, but when I did, like, I literally was like overwhelmed because it was like God was telling me, talk about this. I remember talking about a topic. There was one lady who'd experienced what I talked about literally 40 years earlier, and she literally called everyone in the church that Sunday afternoon to stir up dissension against me because how dare a pastor preach a whole sermon about just one sin. And I'm just like, like whatever, 22-year-old Rob is like, what is happening here? Right? Like I preach something clearly biblical and somebody is trying to have me lynched. I learned pastors are terrible. I mean, I just couldn't help watching people who were my heroes, people who I'd learned from, people who just had done it so well, falling because of sin or treating people so poorly. I remember the first church we worked at where the pastor literally wanted to make himself feel better by diminishing me, by just trying to tear me down almost every time we met. It was awesome. I learned that churches are terrible, right? So it's not just people and pastors. Churches are terrible. I learned this very quickly. I remember my first, Bethany and I got married between our junior and senior years, and so I was working at this church, and they said, okay, so we're going to pay you X amount for this many weeks because you'll be here full time, and then when you go back to school, we'll drop it down a little bit while you guys are in school because you won't be able to be here except for, in the evenings and weekends. Which was fine. That was kind of our arrangement. I remember getting to the last week of the summer, and I had, my pay was like the pay for back in school pay. And I'm like, hey, I was here full time. I worked full time. And I mean, I was literally making $200 a week. Like, we're not, it's like we're not talking about, but it was less. And I was like, hey, guys, and they were like, oh, well, we said X number of weeks so we did the math wrong. But yeah, that's what we decided and agreed to, so sorry. And they never, ever paid me for that. Churches are terrible. I learned that denominations are terrible too. I mean, Bethany actually worked at the headquarters for the denomination I was ordained in, and I remember people who literally would say things like, oh, pray, because we want our kids to get back in church. And then people, their kids would start attending our church and get fired up for Jesus, and their lives would be changed. And mom and dad would literally go to them and say, yeah, don't go to that church. Right? But here's the point, right? Because I don't want to say everything's terrible. But here's the truth, right? No matter where you go, every place is full of broken people and bitey sheep. So what do we need to know about this command that Jesus gave us to love each other as he has loved us? This is what we need to know. The till death love of Jesus compels this, right? Compels this way of living. What way? That we are to love others as Christ has loved us, regardless of how they treat us. Right? Like that part, we all, oh, well, you don't understand how I've been. It doesn't matter. Look at how Jesus was treated and how he loved through it. And we've been talking about this, right? Like the only way to do this is to be connected to Jesus. And by virtue of that connection as a branch to the vine, to have his love for others and the world flowing into us and flowing through us. We can't do this. We need Jesus. And I just want to say this. Back kind of in those early days, if Jesus and I weren't tight, I would have run as fast as I could away from the church long before I ever got to know and appreciate the beauty that exists within the body of Christ, even given all the brokenness. That is just true. So listen, if you hate your job, maybe Try getting closer to Jesus before you blow things up by thinking the next one or the different one will be better. Just as a step. And then the last reminder, I love this, 1 Corinthians 13:8, the very first part of that just reminds us, love never fails. God's love, the love that he wants to give us, that we can have for ourselves and have flow through us to others, it never fails. Listen, church, I talk to people all the time who feel like everyone and everything has failed them. Maybe you feel like this or have felt like this. And these people are where you work, and you may be the one positive constant in their difficult lives, and you may not even know. Because I think we all underestimate how valuable we are every single place that we have been for a while, right? With our friends, in a church, at a job, everywhere. And so what's the idea here? In a world where almost everything else has failed some people, let's show them the one thing that won't fail them ever. In order for them to know that God won't fail them, you are his ambassador. Remember that? And they need to see that God won't fail them through your consistency over a long period of time. You might think the place you go every day is about a job and a paycheck, and I'm here to tell you that God has divine work for you to do while you are there. All right? Actually, Bethany works for an organization called God Works. They do training and conferences to help people see that God is at work where regular people work. And the idea is that, if your life is spent in the marketplace, man, how can you multiply the kingdom there? How can we all start to see ourselves as everyday missionaries wherever God is sending us? And this group, like if they do a conference, they literally commission people, like ministers are commissioned, right, to think that, man, no, when you go to work every day, you need to start thinking about it differently, right? Because God has you in that place and wants you to make a difference for him and for his kingdom where he has placed and planted you. Okay, Rob, sounds great. I get it, and it makes some weight, right? Like it's extra responsibility. But what do I do? There's actually 3 terms for this phenomenon, and I didn't know this. I looked it up. I knew it was a thing. I just didn't know what people called it. Some people call it the Sunday scaries. Some people call it the Sunday blues. Some people call it Sunday syndrome. Like this is a real thing. It's all the same deal. It's the sense of dread and depression people feel that builds all Sunday as they sort of think about Monday, as they think about going back to work. And here's the crazy thing. Some of you are like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Others, oh, no, I know. Listen, 80% of people experience, 80%, right? 8 out of every 10 of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And why does this matter? Because the average person literally spends a third of their life, about 90,000 hours of their life at work. And so what do we do? Like, what do we do when we're like, Rob, I get it, and I do. I want to care for people, and I want to show them Jesus, but I just don't want to go to that place, right? So as we end, I'm going to hit these quickly. I want to give you 5 characteristics of a godly employee that I think no matter where we are, whether we stay in our job, till we retire or are no longer here or we switch, these are 5 things that God wants us to do where we find ourselves every day as his people. All right? So number 1 is these people work hard, right? Godly employees work hard. We were made to work. Although our fallen world makes work more difficult, right? There's pain, there's toil, there's those things. Work itself is not a punishment for sin, right? God gave people jobs even in paradise before the fall. So believers are called to work as we are able to work to provide for ourselves and our families. And God's goal for people was never to get rich quickly so that, I don't have to work anymore. Come on, anybody else kind of like, every time like the Mega Millions, is it like $900 billion? Anybody else ever like, if I could just like win that, I could sleep in tomorrow, right? Come on, right? But God doesn't want this for any of his people. Instead, he wants us to work and to work diligently. I have seen so many sin problems, so many relationship problems as a result of people not working. Having too much time, too much energy, too much space to think, especially in isolation without good sounding boards, and that becomes the playground for our enemy, right? Satan is able to use all that time, all that energy we have that should be directed to work, that God intended for us to sort of burn up all that energy in that way, and then we're like, we think all these crazy thoughts. If you can work and you aren't working, just a couple suggestions. One, get a part-time job, or volunteer so much that you come home tired. Those are two ways to do this, because if you're like, well, I don't work anymore. If you have a lot of energy and time and you just sit and think, probably not a great thing. Number two, they not only work hard, they work well, right? We're not just called to work, we're called to work well, as if we're working for God himself. The Bible talks about this, right? God is the one who gives us the ability to work, and it honors him when we steward those gifts well, right? God's given us the ability, we should use it. And so excellent work, when we do our best, will be recognized and rewarded, the Bible tells us, sometimes by others, sometimes by God, and sometimes by both. I know so many people of faith who see work as just this lesser activity. Like, I'll go to work and then I'll come home, but that doesn't matter because I just want to serve Jesus, right? And so what these people of faith do is they just kind of mail it in at work. And they give minimal effort, like just enough so that I won't get fired and my paycheck keeps rolling in, but really no more than that. Well, come on, some people like this, right? Whether they're people of faith or otherwise. And what do employers, what do other coworkers, what do they say about people like that, right? Like, it makes us look bad, doesn't it? Oh, I can't believe so-and-so, they never pull their weight. They roll in at the last second, they leave the first chance they get, and they're basically lazy the whole time they're here. It makes us look bad, and you know what? It actually discredits our God when this is how we live our life. Doing all things as unto the Lord includes your work. Number three, these godly employees, they serve, and especially those above them, right? Although you can choose to be godly and to be a godly employee, you are not guaranteed to have a godly employer, right? Someone who cares about that. But you are still called biblically to obey those who are in authority over you, not because they are good or righteous, but because you serve a good and righteous God, right? This is what God wants us to do. You should serve your employer with integrity, even when they're not looking, not just to put on a show, but in order to win their approval. Because if you do this when they're looking and when they're not looking, you provide a positive example, and potentially it creates opportunities for you to show and share the gospel with those people. Like, why would you do this? Why would you go above and beyond? Why would you serve me so well? This is the picture of Joseph in Egypt, right? Remember where he actually did what was right by Potiphar, even though it got him thrown into prison? Like, if he would have literally slept with Potiphar's wife like she was pressuring him to, things would have worked out better for him in the short term. But he honored his employer even though the lie got him thrown in prison. He honored Pharaoh also in Egypt, and it really set him up as second in command. I remember in elementary school, Christopher, I had a teacher that basically did nothing. Like nobody ever got in trouble. I mean, you could literally probably fight somebody in the classroom, like just nothing. And so he comes home, he's like, what do I do? And we were like, hey, buddy, this is a great opportunity to learn because I don't remember what grade it was, but elementary school, right? Like earlier grades, like lower elementary. And we were like, Angie, it wasn't you. You were a great teacher. But I still remember he came home, and we were like, Christopher, here's the deal. You are going to have coworkers and bosses and people over you your entire lives who are going to be terrible. And so you need to figure out how to be successful in those environments and thrive. So you might as well learn it now since you have your first opportunity, right? So what a good opportunity to learn and to shine. Number 4. Godly employees, they don't sin. They don't sin. What does this mean? There's an exception to the above rule, right? That you shouldn't obey your superiors if they're asking you to do something wrong, if they're asking you to do something that's ungodly. The chief authority for all of us as humans is God, right? Not other human beings. And so disobeying God or disobeying an order might have consequences, but it's better to be punished for doing good over being rewarded for doing evil. Even if doing the right thing causes you to lose pay or promotions or the job itself, trust that God will judge you justly. I remember when I was selling cars for those 6 months, there was this one couple, and I was like super low pressure salesperson, right? I'd like walk out, here's my card, you want anything, you want a brochure, you want to drive something, let me know, I'll help you. And I remember this couple came in, they were a husband-wife long-haul truck driving team. And they'd been out to dinner with some friends, they'd had a couple drinks, so they didn't want to test drive, but she's like, my dream car it was when the brand new Corvette came out, Camaro. She wanted a Chevy Camaro. And so the new Camaro came out. That was her dream car. Her brother worked at the local Ford dealership. She could have got a Mustang at employee pricing, but she wanted a Camaro. So they're like, we're going to be gone for a week, but then we're coming back. They came back. We worked out a price. She was buying her dream car. So it was prepped. It was ready. Like I did, I always like walked around and scrutinized everything. And as I'm walking around this car, I noticed there was a ding. Like someone had opened another door on the parking lot into this car. And I was looking at it and I was just like, oh. So I went over and I talked to my sales manager and I'm like, yeah, we've got to like do something. We got to call them and postpone delivery. We've got to get this fixed. He's like, they'll never know. What? Yeah, I mean, just don't point it out. They'll never know. And then they'll think they were in a parking lot and someone else did it, and then they can pay for it afterwards. What? I mean, forget being a person of faith. If you were like buying not just your dream car, but any car, would you want to be treated like that? No, right? We can't live like this. Now, all these are important, but this last one may have the most impact on you and your longevity where you work. So godly employees, they rest. They rest. So we are created to work, but we're also designed to rest. God gave us bodies that require rest. Amen? Right? And he commanded his people to take a day every week to do this very thing. So resting well shows that we trust God to provide, that we don't have to constantly be working and striving in order to acquire more and more in order to live. I've read a ton about this. There's so much scientific research out there that lets us know that the most productive human beings on the planet, the people that have achieved the most, accomplished the most, written the most books, work about 5 hours a day maximum. What? Yeah, because the more work we do, there's this law of diminishing returns. At some point, we're spending time, but we're not getting more done. This is why Sabbath is key, not just for people of faith, but really for every human. Why? Because if you burn the candle at both ends, you never, ever, ever get ahead. You only ever burn out. So don't do it, right? Like, rest like God has instructed. Last slide. In some ways, work will always be work, right? It's just always going to feel like work. If you go to work tomorrow and you're like, I know what Pastor Rob said, but this feels like work. It's supposed to, right? It's work. But that does not let us off the hook as people of faith. But think this. You don't have to stay stuck on repeat in your work. Church, God wants to set you free. And this can happen largely from a simple shift in perspective and a shift in your behavior. So I'm just going to say three things. I'm going to kind of say them slowly. And then Sound Foundation is going to come back and lead us in a closing song. Number one, will you get closer to Jesus and start to see where you spend most of your time and the people there through his eyes instead of just yours? Do you see how that might benefit? If you were praying more, if you were reading the scriptures more, if you were talking to God about your work, about those people you get to rub shoulders with, and you're like, Jesus, help me. Help me to see that person that just, rubs my last nerve raw. Help me to see them as you see them. Number two, will you trust that God has you where you are for a purpose and begin to see your work as worship and ministry, not simply a job? You think that would matter? You think that would move the needle? Last one. Wherever you live, work, learn, and play, will you go to those places with and for Jesus and trust that God is up to something in all of it? Right? It's not just monotony. It's not just a waste of your time. God has a divine purpose for you being there.
Work. Most of us spend over half our lives at work. Whatever it is you fill the 9 to 5 with, planting crops, building cars, taking care of patients, teaching students, or running a business, work is where most of life happens. For some, work is a drain. They dread Monday mornings, forcing themselves to struggle through because they need the paycheck, while many times feeling trapped and beaten down by their job. Some people love their work. They're good at what they do. It energizes them. It's a place of security, a place to chase dreams, desires, and success. At work, they find fulfillment. We often forget to connect our faith to our work. We don't consider the reasons God may have us at our job. We don't think about the purpose and meaning we could bring to our work. We simply focus on how it makes us feel. But what if we saw our work as an opportunity to worship? As Christians, we are called to serve Christ with our lives. For a few, that means working as a pastor, a youth minister, or a missionary. Others serve the church by teaching children or singing in the choir. But when Sunday is over, most of us return to our jobs outside the church. For us, our mission is in the marketplace. We may not be the kind of missionary who moves to the far regions of Africa, but around the conference table, around the water cooler, or around the cubicle, we have an opportunity to worship the God who created us. He gave us skill. He gave us passion. He gave us work. When we do our jobs with excellence and integrity and diligence, it's an act of worship. We are displaying God's craftsmanship to the non-believing world around us. We are earning the right to be heard. We don't see a divide between Sunday and Monday, between the sacred and the secular. We've been invited into parts of the world that a pastor or traditional missionary will never see. We have conversations with people who would never set foot in a church. Whether we love or dread our work, we choose to turn the focus away from ourselves and toward the mission God has for us. Church is not the only place we worship, and Sundays are not the only days on our calendars that have meaning. Every day on mission for God brings us great joy. Like the heroes before us, we can be modern-day Noahs and Josephs and Peters who are called with a purpose. God has designed us. He created us to work and to worship. For us, work is worship.